I very much appreciate the rigor and the kindness of your welcome. It is a real treat to be here because I was asked, Craig Omby asked me to speak about, because we've just had Veterans Day Tuesday, to come speak to you in my capacity as a veteran and to share a great story of the Lord's grace. And it's appropriate because, you know, you never know how the Lord puts you in the right place at the right time. And on Sunday, I witnessed a motorcycle accident. Not sure why it occurred. It occurred in front of me. But the manner in which the two motorcycles that weren't in the accident, the compassion of your fellow Americans, life flight, the trooper, the medical folks, the firefighters, regardless of how you dress, regardless of the kind of vehicle you drive, regardless of the color of your skin, Americans take care of each other. And it's neat to be invited to be a part of your family today. I want to share with you that story of what it means to be of an American family and a member of that. The morning of September 11th, I was serving as the military aide to the Deputy Assistant Chief of Staff for Installation Management. That's a nice big title for Chief Donut Getter in the Pentagon. Lieutenant Colonels are just galley slaves inside the Pentagon. Our staff director was hosting a conference, and so, in working in the front office, we had a window office in the E-ring. The E-ring is the outermost ring of the Pentagon. In fact, when I received my officing here at the state capitol when I got elected, the Secretary of the Senate was, oh, well, you know, you're not going to be able to get a window office. And I said, I don't want one. And she's like, well, most people want a window office. You're just not in a position of seniority yet to get one. And I said, I don't want one because, you know, the downside of having a window office is that you can see the plane coming. And she kind of looked at me like, what? You know. But that morning, General Van Antwerp, Miss Menig, we got them out of the building over to the Doubletree where our conference that we were hosting was back gathering, and Sandy and Cheryl and I settled in for what we expected to be a slow day. About 9 o'clock, Sandy gets a call from her daughter, Sam, up in New York, says, hey, Mom, turn the TV on. The World Trade Center's been hit by a plane, and we did in the Pentagon exactly what you were doing 13 years ago, whether it was that first phone call or the radio or TV, whatever the mechanism was that you were receiving word that the nation was going to have a great challenge that day. We went into Miss Menig's office, turned on the TV, and you see the North Tower with the antenna mast and that large, huge gaping hole, and the commentators on the news were talking about an accident. And well, that was our hope. In the back of our minds, there's that fear, that little voice telling us that this didn't smell right. Such a beautiful day, no weather issues, and if I'm a pilot and I've got a catastrophic error that I know that, kind of like Captain Sullenberger, I think it was back in 08, 09, when he put that U.S. air flight into the Hudson River, if I know I'm going to crash, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure I don't. I'm going to put it out in the river, the Atlantic, someplace where we won't kill anybody on the ground. We watched that event unfold, and we would watch Flight 175 crash into the South Tower at nearly 600 miles an hour, and that would confirm that neither one of them were accidents, and that it was not a normal day in the nation's life. Sandy and Cheryl and I knelt down, and we just asked the Lord to put His hand upon the folks up in New York, particularly our first responders, knowing that how difficult it is to respond to such a calamity in the most constricted city in the nation, and that the bulk of the life-saving, as much as we love our first responders, was going to be done by the Lord. We continue to watch events unfold. I'd had my morning Coke, that jolt of caffeine we all need first thing in the morning at about 6:30, 7 o'clock. I now needed to step out and go to the men's restroom. I told Sandy and Cheryl I'd be back in a moment, and those were the last words that I would speak to my two co-workers. When I stepped out to go to the men's restroom, if you recall that portion of the video that you see the Pentagon crumbling, my window is just 4 windows over from where it crumbles. When I walked out to go to the men's restroom, I walked through what would be the impact point, what would eventually crumble, to go up to the fourth quarter, to go to the men's restroom, where the intersection of the E-ring and the fourth quarter, the quarters of the spokes, to go to the men's restroom that's right by the elevator shaft. When I came out of the men's restroom, about 7 or 8 steps, about to turn right to go back through what would be the impact point. So when Flight 77 makes impact with the building, I'm about 15 to 20 yards from the nose of the fuselage making impact with the outer wall of the building. It is by God's grace that I stand before you as the only survivor in the E-ring at the crash site. Because you don't survive an 80-ton jet coming through the building at 530 miles an hour with 3,000 gallons of jet fuel because the Army made you the toughest guy in that building. You survived because the toughest man to ever walk this earth 2,000 years ago had something else in mind for Brian Birdwell. I must also confess to you that when I speak with fellow veterans, I have the privilege and honor of being only one of about a dozen non-posthumous Purple Hearts that were awarded that day for enemy actions at the Pentagon. And it's a bit embarrassing, to say the least, if not a great feeling of inadequacy, when I visit with other men and women who have served in our nation that have been awarded a Purple Heart, when they ask me, Colonel Birdwell, what were you doing when you earned your Purple Heart in the War on Terror? I tell them, I was coming out of the men's restroom. Not particularly sexy, you know, not particularly guys that were clearing buildings in Fallujah and other things, but the Lord can use a trip to the men's restroom for His glory, and that's exactly what He did that morning. This would not be like one of Governor Schwarzenegger's action-adventure movies. This was not an opportunity for me to see the flame coming, see the plane or hear the plane coming, and make a decision to try to escape. Not at all. In fact, as a kid growing up in Fort Worth, when Carswell Air Force Base was a B-52 base, for those of you up in the Tarrant County area know exactly what I'm talking about. If you were sitting in the Ridgemar Mall parking lot and one of those suckers was taking off, you know, you'd sound like the world was coming to an end. And as a career military officer, I've been around a lot of loud things, but nothing as loud as that plane making impact with the building. It was instantaneously deafening, and in that nanosecond I heard the sound, I thought bomb, and in the next nanosecond I'm at the peril of my life, experiencing 3 pains and emotions. First is the pain of the burns. I was burned on 60% of my body, with about 40% being third-degree burns. I was burned from fingertip to armpit on both arms. They're completely grafted around circularly, circumferentially around both arms, the face, the back, the legs. My thumbs have been reconstructed, my eye sockets, my neck, my ears are artificial cartilage with my own skin grafted over it. I'm not the $6 million man, but the 2.4. The other thing that I must confess to you is that when my reconstruction began, guys, you got no idea what it's like being the only man sitting in a plastic surgeon's waiting room. Think about that for a moment. You know what the ladies are there for, and they're looking at me like, you know, and I should have said something like, this was after Dr. Cohen's first attempt, and I'm screaming from the room. The second pain and emotion, or the most immediate life-threatening injury, though, is not the exterior burns, it's the interior. As you're breathing in the aerosolized jet fuel, the putrid black smoke, that slick oil-based, petroleum-based smoke, and then just the temperature of what you're breathing in. It's like, you know, going home, turning on your oven to 300 degrees, and stick your head in there and breathe for a few minutes, and even without the smoke and the aerosolization of the fume, it'll burn your lungs, and the lung tissue begins to blister the same way a burn on the exterior does, where the fluid begins to gather into the blister. And so as I'm burning on the outside rapidly, I'm slowly drowning on the inside. The second pain and emotion is the one that really defines the rigor of terrorism. That sense of panic that grabs your heart when you realize you're facing a life-threatening injury and you cannot escape the source of that injury. As I was struggling to survive, I could see yellow, orangish haze immediately to the front of me, and in the outer periphery of my vision, I could only see black. You know, the lights had been put out, the dark smoke, all the things done with the calamity of the damage. And as I struggled to get up, The Lord creates every one of us with that survival instinct, that zest for living, that even in such calamity, without having to think about it, you're trying to struggle to get up. And I never could get to anything beyond all fours because of the damage of the concussion and the vacuum to my sense of balance and the inner ear. I could get to all fours, but then never get up and kept fumbling over and stumbling over. And these minutes or seconds seem to be taking an eternity. And I come to that point where I step over that line from the desire to live and to try to survive to crossing that threshold that says, okay, Lord, I got it. This is a horrible, terrible way to be called into eternity. And as I did so and as I struggled, I came to that realization, accepted my death, screamed out in a loud voice, Jesus, I'm coming to see you. Collapsed to the floor and waited to die. In doing so, I felt that third pain and emotion, and that's the one that deals with the permanency and the finality of death. I thought about Mel and Matt that morning and how I'd said goodbye, and how that the next opportunity that I would have to see them would be an eternity with the Lord. And as I lay there waiting to hear those words, well done, thou good and faithful servant. You know, the Lord's got a sense of humor. I wasn't really thinking about it in those moments, but had a friend of mine tell me this, and I've latched onto it ever since. And he said, as you were laying there waiting to hear those words, well done, thou good and faithful servant, you didn't get the good and faithful servant part, you just got the well done part. This kernel went from original recipe to extra crispy. And, you know, so there are a number of miracles that occurred that allow me to be with you today. The interest of time does not afford me the opportunity to share all of those with you, because I do want to have an opportunity for y'all to ask a question or two before Tony comes up. As I said, the Lord puts people in your life for the right reasons. I wasn't able to tend to that motorcycle rider that was in front of me, but I was able to call 911, visit with the trooper as the most immediate eyewitness to what I'd seen in front of me. The Lord put 4 men in my life and a number of others that day that would be the reason I would survive. Bill McKinnon, Roy Wallace, John Davies, and Chuck Knobloch are the 4 men that come out of the B-ring doors, the B-ring being the next to innermost ring of the Pentagon, in the 4th corridor. They come out trying to get to an area where they can find fellow co-workers that have been injured, and they come across me and they see me staggering out of the smoke and the fire that's behind me at the crash site. Roy Wallace is the first one. Roy is the first one that I see. And I knew Bill McKinnon. Bill and I had been classmates at Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Let me say that again, classmates at Leavenworth, Kansas, not yeah, it's right down the road though. In my exhaustion of covering 25-30 yards, being skinned alive, and the best way to discreetly say it is terribly indisposed, I am charred, covered in the soot. Portions of my clothes are still intact but covered in my own blood. My access badge and name tag are melted but still hanging from the shirt. As I was laying face down, the back side of me is burning away as my body there is burning. In that relief of knowing that I'm about to turn over whatever decisions are going to be made on behalf of me, I collapse in front of Roy from that relief and that exhaustion. And the 4 of them need to move me quickly. This is not a place to tarry and wait for medical care. It'd be like the fires at the back doors back there, and we're a little bit further down, and this is not a place to wait for medical care to get to me. And in their haste and rapidness of need to move me out of the danger zone and get us out of an area where we may be able to get to medical care, Bill, Roy, Chuck, and John each grab a limb and grab me and give that first exertion to pick me up, but I don't come with them. They end up pulling chunks of the flesh off of me, because what happens with burns is the the liquid is evaporated out of your body. That's what's actually holding you together, so the flesh that remains just comes off so easily. I begin screaming at them to leave me alone. And in my heart, I know I'm telling them to leave me there to die. My comrades don't do that. Chuck actually rolls me over on the left-hand side, and touching me is absolutely agonizing. But in rolling me over, Chuck forcibly puts his arms underneath the torso on the left side of which I'm laying, and in doing so, he takes parts of the back of the flesh. But essentially, Bill, Roy, Chuck, and John shake hands with each other, gripping each other's arms, with my body weight resting on their connected arms, forming a litter that will, as they carry me through a B-ring door into the A-ring being the innermost ring of the Pentagon, furthest away from the crash site. And they'll take me to what eventually becomes a hasty triage site with my first medical care from a great Air Force doctor named John Baxter. You just got to know, as an Army guy, it's hard to say great and Air Force in the same sentence. But since he's the guy with the morphine, man, that made him a great doc. But Dr. Baxter will apply the morphine and the IV to my feet, because the only vein that he can find that isn't burnt or that he can identify is to take my leather shoes off, remove the sock that's remaining under the leather, and then put the morphine in the right foot, insert the IV into the left, and then I'll eventually be evacuated out to North Parking, and then from North Parking thrown in the back of a Ford Expedition, and then taken to Georgetown University Hospital. Being taken to that hospital is the seminal reason I know that the Lord is in direct control of who is in my life, for what reasons, and at what time. The attending physician at Georgetown University is Dr. Michael Williams. And prior to his assumption of duty at Georgetown, Dr. Williams had spent 2 years in a trauma fellowship working under the direction of Marion Jordan and James Jang at the Washington Hospital Center in downtown D.C., which houses the National Capital Region's Regional Burn Center. And Dr. Jordan happens to be its director, and Dr. Jang is chief of research. And so from the perspective of all the emergency room doctors in D.C., I've got the third best doctor available to me that knows not only the airway, breathing, circulation things that come with emergency room operations, but he's going to begin to do the very brutal things that come with being a critical burn survivor, with the excisions, beginning their escharotomy, and the bereavement process. And that's seminal because when Flight 77 crashes in the Pentagon, shortly after that, inside the White House Situation Room, Vice President Cheney will turn to Secretary of Transportation Mineta and tell him to shut down all airspace in the United States. I'll remain at Georgetown for 5 hours. And because of that shutdown of airspace, there's no medevac from the Pentagon to Georgetown. And it is not until about 4 o'clock that afternoon that airspace will be opened up to allow me to be moved from Georgetown to the Washington Hospital Center. Inside that operating room, I'm the only casualty. I have the entire hospital's undivided attention, and I've got the third best emergency room doc that knows what to do with burns in the nation's capital. As I'm wheeled inside, it's like a battle drill. You vets know exactly what I'm talking about, police, fire, all y'all know what I'm just describing. Battle drill is designed to bring as much order out of chaos as possible, and they were not practicing chaos, they were practicing order, but there was intensity, the voice commands, the various things that are occurring as the team is doing each of their functions that lead to the complete treatment of the person that's been brought in. I know that I'm in that moment that the Lord may have spared my life inside the Pentagon, and that was my first seminal moment of the day, but I'm now at my second, knowing that the question of life or death for the day has not been answered, and that there's a very strong possibility that whatever happens next in those few moments that I still have of lucidity before the anesthesia is applied, I will be speaking my last words. Dr. Williams comes to the side, and my face is nearly swollen and shut. My eyes are just, I can barely see through the slits in them. I can see in Dr. Williams' eyes the intensity of what he's about to tell me. He says, "Brian, we're going to do the best that we possibly can for you." And I knew in my heart what that meant. That I may very well be speaking my last words. And as I said, the question of life or death hasn't been answered. I asked to do two things. Normally with a burn, if you're wearing jewelry, whether it's a ring, a bracelet, a necklace, if that's the part of the body burned, as the body swells and the jewelry does not, the jewelry becomes a tourniquet, and it normally is cut off of the burn survivor. I didn't want the ring destroyed because there was no opportunity to speak with Mel or Matt beforehand. So I asked for the wedding ring to be taken off my finger, and you can imagine what my hands look like. They look like 5 blackened hot dogs extending from a burnt hamburger called the palm. And Judith Rogers, the OBGYN nurse that answered the all hands on deck call, and just everybody available, get to the emergency room and assist where needed. Oh, you'll be happy to know the test for pregnancy came back negative. But when Judith reaches for the ring, she gives it a slight tug. My body, as it's been cooling, has been solidifying and hardening. As she gives it that tug, she degloves the remainder of the ring finger of the left hand. Blood begins streaming out of the base of my palm, but I don't recall it hurting. I'm looking at it and seeing what's happening, and it's a gruesome thing to look at, but I don't remember any physical pain, and I don't think so much because of Dr. Baxter's morphine shot, but because I was concentrating on the dignity and the finality of the death, that I knew that I was dying and saying goodbye to my wife and my son. And then I asked for the hospital chaplain. Chaplain Cirillo came to the right-hand side. We just said that prayer. It wasn't one that, let me figure out what faith I'm going to be as I'm about to step into eternity. It was not that kind of a prayer. It was a prayer that I knew where my Lord and Savior was, and I knew who He was, and I knew where I was going to spend eternity. It was just simply a prayer that acknowledged that, Lord, if you've brought Brian here, and under Dr. Williams' hand and the staff here, that he survives, we'll salute that flag and move out with that mission. But if you've brought Brian here under the care and compassion of his fellow Americans to quietly call him into eternity, we'll salute that flag too. It was with recognition of whose picture hung above the presidents and the chain of command photos of my life and my eternity. And when that prayer was done, it wasn't with the strength of a soldier, it was with the strength of faith in Christ that I could look at Dr. Williams and very laboredly say, let's get on with it. Resting in the comfort of who was really in charge in that operating room. It would tilt my head back, put the mask over my face, and that's an image I will never forget. The anesthesia would be applied, and that would be the first of 39 trips to an operating room to rebuild and reconstruct me that would take 4 years. There are many other challenges. I won't belabor those, or it really is a great story of the Lord's grace. But the main thing I wanted you to take from this story isn't, maybe the sick burn humor or the cheesy jokes, or what I want you to take from that story is the Lord's still in charge, and no matter where our men and women serve, as a veteran, it isn't being on the battlefield in a far distant place and being the guy that pulled the trigger on bin Laden. It isn't being the guy that gets the sexiest accolades for valor. It's every man and woman that has ever put on the uniform of this nation that was willing to put on that uniform. We champion all. We don't champion you simply because you got the highest medals or the Purple Heart. We champion you because you served, because you were willing. And that's really the key word. In John Wayne's final movie, The Shootist, he gives a shooting lesson to Ron Howard. If you recall the movie, John Wayne is a dying gunfighter, dying of cancer. And Ron Howard gets that shooting lesson and shoots almost as well as John Wayne. Ron Howard asks him, how have you come out on top every time you've been in a gunfight? I nearly tied you shooting. And John Wayne's answer is the seminal answer. Even though it's to the character in the movie, it describes veterans. He says, it isn't being the fastest or being the most accurate that counts, it's being willing. I found out early that most men, regardless of cause or need, aren't willing. They blink an eye or draw a breath before they pull that trigger. I won't. In this nation, we still have great men and women that put on the uniform of this nation. And whether they served in peacetime, wartime, or even in wartime, they served sitting in a chair in some office building. Every one of them has been willing. They didn't blink an eye or draw a breath before they pulled that trigger on serving to defend our freedoms. And to you that are veterans, to you that are spouses of veterans, or your sons, or your fathers, or your brothers, uncles, aunts, thank you for the part you played in making sure that this nation receives and maintains its freedom. Thank you so much for your kind welcome. I look forward to just a couple of questions. Thank you for your very kind reception. What do you want to ask? What's on your mind? Anybody want to know about that?
Went through, and standing here today, being a survivor of all of that, why did you decide to go out there and become a politician?
There's a one. I want to try to be a statesman as opposed to a politician. A politician will tell you what you want to hear, and there's times that I have to visit with folks and I can't tell them what they want to hear, but I'd better have the candor to tell them the truth. I'd always been very politically aware, because for those that are not in uniform, the best way to retain your freedom and your liberties is the ballot box, and that's the sword through which the American people decide what's the philosophy of governance under which we will live. I don't want to say this tritely, but having been a member and retired member of the profession of arms, I've studied warfare and for my 20-plus year career. Colonel Clausewitz, who wrote on war, the famous quote out of that is, "War is politics by another means." So now I'm in politics, which is war by another means. So it's, I think I'm well suited to it. But no, it's more just when you've got a passion for not only service, but what type of service, the type of service that guards your liberties, guards your freedoms. All too often we've got folks that culturally in this country look for government to do something for them. I ran on the thought process associated with what's the real proper function of government, what level of government should be doing what, and then making sure that my duty as a state officer, my duty is to protect you from government. And while there is clearly a proper role and function of each entity of government and how it's structured, I always look at it from a minimalistic perspective, and having that on my heart and how the Lord put it on my heart, the right people that had asked me to think about running for office, and that it was the right time in life. My son was in college and about to graduate and the like. It made perfect sense to step forward and say, send me, here's what I believe, and as such the Lord blessed that, and here I am. But I also want you to recognize that in the tone of my answer that it is I was not elected to a position of authority over the people of Senate District 22. I was elected to a position of authority subordinate to the people of Senate District 22. And that's the perspective from which I try to serve to the best of my ability. Other questions? Let me take one more and then I'll turn it back over to you. So
one more. Anything else for the center?
Quick question.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
How old were you? I remember going through Vietnam era at a very young age to have all that happen to you. How old were you?
I was 39, and your question is very prescient actually, because it's something I didn't say in the comment time I had. The normal way you calculate a burn survivor's chances of survival is you take the number 100, subtract the age of the burn survivor, and then the total body surface burn, whether it's first, second, third degree, because of the compromise of your skin is your immune system, your primary immune system. So with the loss of and the compromise of that system, when you take the number 100, the total body surface burn, and the age away, your chances of survival is what's left. I had a 60% total body burn at 39 years of age. Just from an exterior burn perspective, the chances of my survival were highly limited. In fact, there were a number of folks that, while Dr. Jordan wasn't ready to tell her yet that my survival was limited, we weren't at that point yet, but there were others that were saying, you need to be thinking about this. So when you add the inhalation injury to that, I mean, I never should have survived impact. I never should have survived what I did in the building, and I never should have survived the duration of the challenges that you go through in the hospital and the like. That's why a child with a large burn has a better chance of surviving than a very senior adult with a small burn. And so the Lord was, you know, even with the Lord on your side, 1% works. So, hoo-ah. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Senator Birdwell.